you all for your remarks. The first thing I'd like to discuss are some of the business models that we could employ for deploying IoT within cities. So public-private partnerships are one way that cities are attacking this issue. Private sector gains access to a test bed, and the public sector benefits from the application of that technology to better manage critical infrastructure and resources. So I wanted to get an idea from the panel, what do you think are some sound business models for deployment of IoT within energy, water, or transportation?
Well, maybe I'll start by saying we're not sure that it's a sound business model, but it is one that cities around the world are gravitating toward, which is new revenue from old assets like data, which hasn't been monetized before, and which cities are partnering with non-government entities, mostly business entities, to try and figure out how they can monetize the valuable data that a traffic light with a sensor can capture as traffic flows. Maybe in a way that not only monetizes that and makes it valuable to a real estate developer who wants to know about traffic patterns, but also monetize it in a way that helps encourage traffic decongestion. So, you know, the jury is still out. We don't know whether or not taking data sets that were previously underutilized and turning them into revenue streams is actually going to work in the long term for everybody, or maybe only for the citizen.
So I'll just talk about business models for a second. I guess if I can leave everybody with a little bit better understanding about how the public-private partnership thing could actually work, that would be, you know, a great thing for everybody to know. So I hear often, you know, why isn't PG&E doing this already? Why isn't the electricity company, the water company, why aren't they doing this already? Shouldn't they just be doing this already? And the answer is really easy. Either they haven't asked the commission for permission, or they have asked and we said no. So there's a lot of reasons why a monopoly regulated entity wouldn't want to ask to do new stuff. They'd have to, you know, do work and change their business model, and you know, it would take effort, and it's in the unknown. And if they did ask and we said no, it probably wasn't in the ratepayer interest, or we didn't balance the reasonableness of the expenditures it would take to do the program versus the bang for the buck, if you will. And we have a lot of different departments in the agency that, you know, do that. It's called a reasonableness review. It's a pretty big, long-standing calculation. So if you want to do an Internet of Things program with a regulated entity, just know that three ways that can happen is the regulated entity asks the commission for permission, the commission, we would tell the regulated entity to do it, direct it through a decision, or the legislature would direct the commission to implement a program in the regulated utility. So that none of those involve having a private company say, hey, utility, why don't you just do this? There is a piece that the regulated entity, has to get permission from the commission, from the government, to do anything, because we have to balance to make sure that the expenditure is in the ratepayer interest, and we can continue to ensure that safe, reliable service at just and reasonable rates is provided to the citizens of the state of California.
Is NEST engaging in any collaboration with public utilities?
We are. So we've had great partnerships with utilities across the country, and often it involves coming up with some sort of a customer offer. So it would be some sort of an incentive that we would offer to customers to either join a energy efficiency program or a rebate on that product, on the thermostat. But obviously the process to get there is, you know, going through often an RFP process, working directly with the utility to support their interactions with their state energy commissions, and doing measurement and verification with them to make sure that these, you know, the regulated dollars can be used to be spent on these devices. So it's a great collaboration. For us, it's instrumental, because I think you're only going to get so many people to buy products like this through retail. The utilities and energy companies are a great path to market for us.
So the business people can explain what's a good business model or not, but what I think is really important, and what, at least on a national level, what policymakers should be focusing on to kind of encourage adoption is sharing best practices. You know, we talked about this before, but so there's a couple groups that have published their own like smart city financing guides and all these different financial mechanisms about how to do like value capture if you network your bridge. And there's all these financial terms that I don't quite understand myself, but there is information out there. A lot of it's speculative just because we haven't seen these kind of deployments through municipal infrastructure in any sort of large capacity. But when something works, everyone else who cares about it needs to know about it because otherwise, I mean, you have to basically incentivize sharing what works and what doesn't work so they don't make the same missteps.
Exactly. I think we should also share what doesn't work because we don't want to replicate failures.
Exactly.
So why not share an insight on what you did and how it failed and see if it also fits with your city. So
Well, there are some good examples where public-private partnerships have failed big time. An example people might want to look at is when the Australian-based bank Macquarie bought the parking meter assets from the city of Chicago. Classic case. And so there is public infrastructure that citizens have paid for. There are private investors who would like to own that. In many countries, impossible. Others who would like to operate it on a concession for, let's say, 20 years and generate revenue either on a shared basis with the owner of the asset or maybe invest a portion of those profits in upgrading, which is often where the conflict comes. So the nice thing about public-private partnerships, there's lots of different models, and every model within the PPP framework, you can find a royal failure, but also a pretty interesting success story. So it comes back to the politics of who decides. Often citizens are unengaged, unfortunately.
I think that's a great segue to my next question, unless you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the shared resources. If you deploy an infrastructure and then you say there's a business model for some other service that could come in over the top, one of the concerns people have is I've modeled my service on a battery life, on a certain activity model. If you now come in with a new service, I can see a few cents of extra revenue, but it might really kill my battery or kill my spectrum. So I think this whole thing about the use case needs to get thought through. And there was a talk this morning in the earlier session about a parking meter where they set it up to monitor every second. And then they realized actually you don't need that granularity. So I think there's a touch of reality here where what's the return for your buck without telling people I'm going to totally flood your network and use a lot of unnecessary traffic. Where's this natural balance?
Yeah, cost-benefit
Yes.
analysis
Yes.
of deployment. Well, one thing we've talked about now about collecting the vast troves of data. And a lot of that data will be collected in partnership with public entities or by putting IoT devices on public infrastructure. So what do you think are the best practices for sharing data collected through private and public IoT in the interest of the public good?
Well, maybe I'll start. Microsoft, which is a partner with Meeting of the Minds, has a powerful array of solutions in Azure, in the Microsoft cloud, which enables not just capturing the data itself, but finding the insights in all of that raw data and being able to analyze what is actually happening in real time that enables a decision maker to go from big data to little decisions that are actually going to be meaningful to reduce congestion in the traffic and transport domain, or to reduce energy loss or reduce water loss, just to take a few examples of the efficiency gains. So the question becomes, is the decision maker who may own the data and who's using, let's say, a Microsoft cloud-based service, empowered and enabled to take advantage of the opportunity? Because it's expensive. Build a sensor network, transport that to the data center, run the analytics, and then very rapidly, because all of this is happening in microseconds, be able to capture some insight that then becomes actionable. And lots of cities are not well designed for action in real time.
So this goes back to what I was saying about how I think open data and smart cities go hand in hand. When the federal government collects information, say it's like a NOAA weather station, that is public information, and the government does not profit from giving it away, but it generates incredible amounts of economic and social value. Like every smartphone app you ever use to tell your weather comes from NOAA. That's open data. If it's a sensor on a light post that monitors air quality and light pollution in the middle of a city, that should be no different. If it's a publicly funded data collection, that the public should also get to enjoy the results of that. However, given that the Internet of Things is like it's an emerging set of technologies, it's relatively untested, it's risky, and it's expensive. You know, from a pragmatic perspective, the best way to, I think, encourage more cities to do this is that, you know, you not to consider, you know, the air quality levels of your city as a revenue stream, but a workaround that has been proposed for NOAA data, and I think actually Microsoft and Amazon, a couple of the cloud providers are on board with, is you know, this idea of access fees, and they're basically at cost equivalent to paying access to a public park or a national park, where the government does not profit from it, but it's basically the only way to keep the lights on. And ideally, if I had my druthers, it'd be free open data because that's the ideal. But given the option of no data and paying a low access fee for data, I would go with the latter every time.
So at Nest, we take a very consumer-centric approach to data, and the reason for that is rooted in the fact that if customers don't trust that their data is being shared with their consent and you're very transparent with what you're doing, they're not going to buy your product. Ours is an expensive product. They're not going to buy that product. They're not going to sign up for third-party integrations in the developer program. They're not going to do utility partnerships. So for us, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to be as clear as possible with the consumers on what we're going to do, and when we offer them a third-party integration and an opportunity to share their data, tell them exactly what they're sharing and what benefit they serve to gain by doing that. And in the case of, you know, partnerships with, you know, regulated utilities in particular, I can say that, you know, in the early days that was a challenge, because obviously, you know, we have policies that we follow very closely. You know, the requests from regulated utilities could often be very broad, very unrestrained. We have to work closely with them on the terms and conditions of these programs. And but for us, it was core to the success and proliferation of these and the scalability of these. And now, as you can see from that map, we've now been able to kind of replicate this model. And I think on both sides, there's been an appreciation for, you know, what they actually need to measure and verify, you know, what we need to feel good about our business and about customers' trust. And it's an evolution, and I think it, you know, gets better as this technology gets better known.
I think Emily touched on a great point in her remarks about equity and deployment of broadband internet, which will affect scalability of IoT technologies. I think cities are right now at a very exciting point to deploy IoT technologies, but it's also a pivotal point for them, and they need to engage with constituents in a meaningful way to be able to design plans for broadband deployment. So what role do public agencies, the private sector, and the public play in supporting equitable deployment of IoT?
Well, I would say that at the Commission, we have large stakeholder processes for any programmatic deployment of anything. And I mentioned the Electricity Data Access Committee as a 3.5-year stakeholder process that got to our, like, let's call them level 1 rules about data sharing. And, you know, because we have to take into consideration not just what Google wants, not just what the utility wants, but what, you know, private citizens want and ratepayer advocates want, and our internal Office of Ratepayer Advocates, who their sole purpose at work is to ensure that the public good is kept safe and secure. So the answer to your question is you have to participate. So the Commission doesn't make any decisions on anything without a robust record, and the way that you help the Commission make a decision that would move in a direction that you would want it to go is by submitting comments. And we've spoken at length about how annoying that process is, because that would require someone to be interested and follow along and write down information that they'd want the government to have about their needs and, you know, their issues with a process, and submit them into a formal process, which you'd have to go to the right website and submit it in the proper way and have it formatted. And then once it was in the formal process, it gets mushed in with everybody else's filings, and then from all of the filings that we receive, we would take it all and, you know, balance the equities and come out with the decision. But the really most important part of that is if you being the interested party, interested person, don't give us the information that you want us to have, we can't make a decision on it. So if you don't tell us, we can't do anything about it. We don't just make up things. We say, how do you want us to do this? And then all the parties tell us what they want, and then we come up with a decision based on what's in the record, based on what the parties told us. So participation is key.
Gordon?
Well, citizens have a couple of ways to engage. They're not really engaged in IoT yet, but Nest has really been the first large-scale consumer deployment by a sophisticated consumer-facing company, and that's been a success story. And you've been selling it, on efficiency and cost saving, but also on the environmental impact, which I like the fact that both of those are together in the messaging and in the marketing. But then the consumer/citizen can vote, and I don't believe there's been an elected official ever elected because of IoT yes, IoT down, and that's just not happened yet. And then the third is to basically engage with institutions of government, and that doesn't happen very often. So the question is, with large numbers of urban population having a smartphone, can we deploy easy-to-use applications that may, in fact, incentivize the user to be part of the IoT in the city solution? And there are a couple of interesting early examples like See-Click Fix to focus on the pothole and the problem of getting the pothole repaired using the accelerometer in the smartphone. So we're in the early stages of new kinds of citizen engagement. And Meeting of the Minds has been spending a lot of time looking at examples like See-Click Fix to figure out what's working, what's not working, what's replicable, what's scalable, what's transferable, and it's on our blog site, so I'd encourage people to look at that.
At least from a consumer-facing perspective and tying it back to like the sustainability discussion, a lot of these, whether it's like a Fitbit or a Nest, there are a lot of kind of social externalities generated once you have a whole community using these technologies that affect the value of the product, but what most consumers probably don't really consider when they're buying a Nest. Like of course, there is an economic argument for it that it's energy savings in the long run. It ends up paying for itself after however many months. But not everyone has the $100 or $200 laying around to install that system. However, if you have an entire municipality with Nest thermostats and connected home appliances that use energy much more responsibly, they dramatically reduce energy consumption, the social benefits as a whole are potentially enormous. It's like it could be dramatically less strain on the power grid, less pollution, less downtime, less costly repairs, and that's value that's being generated that consumers don't really get to capture directly. So if a city or local government or federal government can somehow return that value to consumers where it affects their point of sale decision, that would go, I think, a really long way to actually ensuring that everyone can participate in this, at least from a consumer perspective.
That was great.
This is taped.
Yeah.
Actually,
Great,
this is
great,
taped, so we'll share that
You may
with you.
appear in a Nest
Great.
commercial.
Yeah. You might need a
If you hook up my house, I'd
But
totally
we
say
all
that.
have
Yeah.
to share in the residuals on
Right.
that advertising.
Fair.
Exactly.
That's fair.
Well, I was going to say that, if, somebody proposes that in an application to the commission, we can consider it. No one's done that yet. And on the flip side, if somebody's running for a position of authority, like on the water board, for example, and says, I'm not going to raise anyone's taxes, and then gets a proposition that says, let's install smart water meters, and then they realize that in order to install a smart water meter everywhere, it's going to cost a huge amount of money, but they've already guaranteed that they're not going to raise anybody's taxes. That's how someone's going to not get voted on again to install Internet of Things technology.
We just call it user fees, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, important. Well, I was going to say there's an initiative in the UK called IoT UK that takes effort to promote awareness about IoT and feedback. Did you want to comment on
Yeah, I
that?
was just going to say there's a number of initiatives, putting computers and modules in the hands of school kids, getting education, getting people more aware that an app isn't a game. It is something you can actually do something useful with, connect to other devices, build your own network at home, play together. So in this environment where we've got this great Kickstarter phenomenon, in the past, if you want to start a company, you'd have to go off and talk to a bunch of VC guys, and then they would make some selection process, rather like your committees you're talking about. Now with Kickstarter, you come up with an idea. Suddenly you're on the internet. Suddenly you've got funding. Suddenly you've got a problem. You've got to build this very quickly. But it's fun, right? They enjoy the whole process. There's a whole spirit of innovation. We've got to be careful. We don't say these older infrastructures are going to stifle this. We've got to let them play. So I think that your app idea is a good one.
All right, we'll do it. You ready? All right, we're building a company here.
But I also think with the spirit of innovation, we need to teach awareness about security and privacy and data stewardship concerns. But with that, we would like to open it up to questions from the audience. Any questions?
I'm just kind of curious if the industry is thinking of like a moonshot, like cancermoonshot2020.org, because we have runaway problems that are massive, and they're going exponential, and that's what this Internet of Things is trying to get control of them. For example, government subsidies on fracturing our communities, injecting greenhouse gases underneath our homes, and yet being protected under non-disclosure laws of the hazards or the accidental consequences. The Public Health Department refusing to do credible health analysis. I mean, this is happening in real time, and it's out of control worldwide. And we have technologies to generate energy and clean water systems, but we're exploiting them for money and under the protection of non-disclosure laws and government subsidies. It seems like the citizens their health is under a great deal of compromise.
Gordon.
Well, if you look at our site, you'll see that the winner of our IoT hackathon last year was a Richmond-based organization. We're very focused on what's happening in Richmond, and this hackathon happened in Richmond, and the idea was to get technology that would be focused on reducing greenhouse gases and other pollutants, particularly given the problems next to the Chevron refinery. And the winner developed an IoT-powered solution which attaches to your car and tells you what kind of environmental pollutants are in the place where you happen to be driving, but also transmits that to a common database that allows you to get a picture of what's happening in your neighborhood as you drive through. So a lot of interesting innovation is happening around using IoT to address scary environmental scenarios. And that's, in fact, one of the areas where IoT innovation is probably maybe more outstanding than in health right now. A lot of money has been thrown into IoT in healthcare, but not to address cancer and related issues. It's more at this moment about lifestyle, inculcating the healthy lifestyle by creating awareness in the end user who has the IoT-enabled wearable device. But on the environmental side, it's really been to address these fundamental pollutants like greenhouse gases. So it's worth looking at that. I think that's an interesting story that indicates that a lot of the IoT innovators are actually very aware of the social and environmental challenges, which is good news.
And I think IoT and citizen science will enable more transparency around the impacts of these decisions, and our elected leaders operate off of science-based findings and statistics in their reports. We hope so. So I think that will promote change within those domains.
Maybe one more question?
I'd like to ask a variant of the previous topic is to get your comments on the topic of democratization of data, meaning that you have all this talk about all the data and databases and how you're going to analyze it, and presumably you get better public decision making from that. The other half of it is that that same data should be available to the public so they can run the data themselves and see if they come up with the same conclusions. I would think that that would actually engender more confidence in public decision making, or it takes the backroom deal out because it shows you that it is based on the sound science or the data that's there. And just your comments on where we could go with that.
So I get to keep talking about open data, which is great for me. It's the same problem whether or not sensors are involved, right? So it's the same issue of government accountability, scrutinizing financial decisions, analyzing them for efficiency, and detecting fraudulent or abusive spending. The sensors basically, the Internet of Things will basically just put that on steroids. Like the amount of data will explode, and the amount of things we can learn and criticize that probably deserves criticism will explode. What I think is really important is that as we you know, as cities increasingly publish sensor data from lampposts and stuff online, it's not just an issue of publishing a data set, because, you know, most people, myself included, I would have no idea how to work with that. It's about making data usable, and there's been a pretty encouraging strain of that in a lot of the open data communities. Some people, you know, the ones that have the fortune of living in a city with leadership on this issue, that they've had open data portals first, and now they can make it usable. Montgomery County, Maryland is a pretty good example of this, where, you know, they have an open data portal. You can download all the data you want. It's machine readable, whatever, but that doesn't matter to the average person. But they have these portals called like spending.montgomery.gov, and you can, it's like a really easily analyzable visualization tool and comparison tool, where you can drill down to every contract and understand why spending on snowplows went up 200% in the past 2 years, because like we've had like huge storms, but no one can figure that out if they don't have a data science education otherwise. So I think that becomes increasingly important as we get so much more data about how our government works and how our cities work, is that it's not just dumping information on someone, it's presenting it to someone responsibly.
I'll come back to something that a lot of the technologists and policymakers consider the crucial element in enabling the democratization of data, which is visualization. And it used to be visualization as in smart graphics, graphically presenting great information culled from the mass of data to provide an insight. And we all think visually at some level, and we can comprehend complex things more easily with a simple graphical presentation. Now we're reaching a completely new level, and I think Josh mentioned HoloLens, and I would encourage everybody to look at some of the information about augmented reality technology like Microsoft's HoloLens, because suddenly the information that the city is being provided by a developer who wants to change an intersection because of a new development project, or change the nature of the public park facing City Hall, no longer do you have to try to figure out what an architect is trying to describe on a piece of paper that's stored somewhere or maybe available on a PDF in a two-dimensional world. You can now be in a three-dimensional world, use HoloLens and other kinds of augmented reality technologies to see what the fabric of the city changes would be if that architect developer's vision as proposed to the city was adopted by the planning department. So suddenly you're providing tools that enable complex data to be comprehended by ordinary people whose lives are going to be affected in the neighborhoods that they care about. So I think that's the big breakthrough right now on democratization. It used to be visualization. Graphics technology you guys were designing was wonderful, but now we're a step ahead, maybe 10 steps ahead.
Well, let's thank our panelists. So thank you all for your remarks.